right? And now I come to the disastrous consequences of the Bush dynasty. Just because you find it impossible to believe that something could happen, it doesn't mean that it's impossible for that very thing to have happened. When I think of 9/11, that's exactly what I think of. I think of the millions of American people who find it impossible to believe that their own government could be complicit or even culpable for 9/11, which caused the death of 3,000 Americans. But I'm afraid to tell you that all the evidence points to the fact that that is exactly what has happened. It's been 17 years since the 9/11 atrocity, and there still has been no resolution. There's been no arrest made or no blame laid at anybody's door apart from the supposed hijackers. Now, nothing in my lifetime has saddened me as much as the events of 9/11, but not just the events of that day. The aftermath of 9/11 was just as disheartening because I feel so much grief, not only for the victims. I can't even begin to comprehend the horror that they experienced that day. But in the intervening years, the grief upon their families, not knowing exactly why their loved ones died or who really caused their deaths. And also, I feel sorry for the survivors who, even to this day, are suffering health problems that have come about because of the events of 9/11. Now, there's no good thing to come out of 9/11, but a helpful part of 9/11 is this, that it happened in the internet age, which means that there's plenty of CCTV footage, camera footage, um, internet advice, and witness eyewitness testimonies, all relating to the events that day. So this video is just going to be a dumb Irish guy from 3,000 miles away and what he makes of it all, basically. Now, I'm no expert in explosives or controlled demolition or terrorism or politics, but I do have a pair of eyes that work, and I do have a degree of common sense. When it comes to a conspiracy, what you're looking out for is you're looking out for lies, because if you find one lie, it always leads to more lies. And basically, you're looking for smoking guns. And with all the evidence available, there's one thing for sure: 9/11 is full of smoking guns. And because of that fact and the obvious evidence, it all points, in my opinion, to the fact that the American government not only allowed 9/11 to happen, but actually caused 9/11 to happen. So what are my issues with the main official story of 9/11? Well, they are as follows. First of all, there's the witnesses. Many of the witnesses on 9/11 claim to have heard explosions in the World Trade Center buildings. This is completely refuted by the government, but these eyewitnesses, many of whom are firefighters and policemen, basically the emergency services, who have been lauded as being heroes that day, lauded by the government, lauded by the people, lauded by the mayor as being heroes on 9/11. Yet 2 days later, when they made claims to have heard explosions, etc., they're being vilified as liars. So it begs the question, are these emergency service personnel, are they heroes or are they liars? In my opinion, they have no reason to lie. Just as the many experts from all over the world, experts in demolition and explosives, many experts around the world, again, have refuted the official storyline. Are they liars? Have they got a reason to lie? I know that if the government are complicit, they've got every reason to lie. But these experts from all over the region, they've got nothing to gain, just as the firefighters have nothing to gain from lies. Now, the experts come in many fields and they come from many different countries, but you can find them all over the internet, and they're vehement in their belief that controlled demolition brought down the World Trade Center buildings. So once the buildings were brought down. There was a pile of wreckage to deal with, molten steel and rubble everywhere. Now, the American government could not get rid of this evidence quick enough. They carted it all off at the first available opportunity, sent it away to China. Why could this evidence, this wreckage, this steel, this molten steel and rubble, why could it not be stored away in some scrapyard somewhere? I mean, America has got scrapyards, hasn't it? From what I can see, half the country's a scrapyard. So there was no reason other than to hide the evidence for all this wreckage to be exported out of the country as soon as possible before any experts or forensic testing or investigation of the cause of 9/11 could be carried out on this wreckage. Does that not strike you as strange? It does me. Also, just think of this. You're a terrorist. You've managed to smuggle your way through customs. You've got your passport, you've put it in your pocket, you've climbed aboard a 747. Mid-flight, you've managed to overcome the cockpit and take control of the plane. You're now flying this plane, even with minimal training and minimal airtime. You're managing to control this large 747 towards the Twin Towers. You're determined to plough that building into them towers for Allah. As you approach the building, you're aiming, you're heading there, you're going to do this, God bless Allah, and you plough that into the building. You plough that 747 right through the World Trade Center. You're met with a ball of fire as your engines, your fuel tank explodes, and you're incinerated by the explosion of 500 gallons of jet fuel. 40 minutes later, the building collapses. 500,000 tons of rubble collapses from 200 meters up into the air and basically crushes you to a pellet. 2 days later, an FBI agent proudly holds aloft your passport, your undamaged, unscratched, unscathed passport he has found 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. How is this possible? How can the passport have gone through all this and be found, located, hundreds of yards away, unscathed? You cannot make this shit up, okay? Also, regarding the World Trade Center, leading up to 9/11, full floors of the World Trade Centers were taken over by workmen. Full floors were closed off to anybody else's access, only these workmen who were carrying out essential maintenance works. Essential. Shoving thermite into the building. Essential. Yeah. Well, it was essential in order for the buildings to collapse. Also with the World Trade Center, building number 7, the one that wasn't hit by an aeroplane, the one that was brought down by flying debris, the one that the BBC claimed to have collapsed even though it was in full view in the background on a live feed. If you want to have a conspiracy, make sure you bring the BBC in, because they're experts on the cover-up. Ask Jimmy Savile. Right, again, another issue I have with the World Trade Centers is to do with the luckiest man who ever lived. This man is called Larry Bernstein, and a few months before 9/11, he took out a 99-year lease on the buildings. He won the rights to take control of the buildings and took out a 99-year lease, for which he made an upfront payment of £124 million, when the full price was £1 billion. He then proceeded to insure the World Trade Center buildings for £3 billion. He insured them against various acts of nature and also against terrorist attacks. Now, another thing that really peeves me about this Larry Bernstein is, in the days and weeks preceding 9/11, that man took his breakfast every morning, not once a week, not twice a week, every morning he took his breakfast in a cafe or a restaurant in one of the Trade Center buildings. Except on the morning of 9/11, he was nowhere to be seen. Neither were his 2 children, who also worked every day in the Twin Towers. So where was Larry Bernstein on the morning of 9/11? Apparently, his wife had booked him in for a doctor's appointment, but it was a doctor's appointment he never attended. Larry Bernstein, despite having taken his breakfast in the Twin Towers for the previous weeks previously, on the morning of 9/11, he stayed at home all day. And his children were not to be seen in the World Trade Center either. That's one lucky man, I tell you that. Now, once the Trade Center buildings came down, including Building 7, in which it's well documented that he told somebody to pull Building 7. Larry Bernstein asked for Building 7 to be pulled. Once these buildings had collapsed to the ground, he was now £3 billion richer. But he wasn't happy with that. He went back to the airline companies and he tried to sue them for a further $3 billion because he said the two separate aeroplane attacks on the two separate buildings constituted two terrorist attacks. Therefore, he should be paid double. In other words, he should have double his profits. I think in the end, it was settled whereby the airlines paid him £1 billion. So for $124 million down payment, he then collected a few months later £4 billion. He also, by the grace of God, managed to have the day off along with his two children that the buildings collapsed. Now either that's the greatest slice of luck ever known to mankind, or it's a crock of horseshit. I'll let you decide. I've made my decision. Right, on to the other acts of terrorism. The attack on the Pentagon doesn't take much covering. Basically, the Pentagon, one of the most high secure, highly protected buildings in the world, obviously with CCTV cameras everywhere, managed to get no footage of the attack that day, except for one 3 or 4 second, split second video footage of a flash at the side of the building. Even then, that footage confirms my belief that a low-flying missile struck the Pentagon. When you look at the aftermath, you see no wing damage. You don't see a hole big enough to fit an exploding 747. Neither do you see any bodies. Neither do you see any plane wreckage. The Pentagon, 1,000,000% was struck by a low-flying missile. The evidence is there for you, American people. Look at the evidence and for God's sake, believe it. As for Flight 93, I haven't got much to say about that, but what I can say is, if you look on Google Earth on that exact spot where they say the plane crashed, look on Google Earth previously and you'll see a crater which is basically the same crater that the government showed the day after 9/11 to show the resting place of Flight 93. A resting place where no wreckage, no plane wreckage, no engines, no bodies was to be found. They claim that the wreckage bounced a mile in this direction, a mile in that direction. Neither have the black box ever been recovered, and neither have any of the black box's voice recordings ever been made public, if they've even been found. Again, highly, highly, highly suspicious, highly, highly unbelievable. But they're the actual attacks themselves. So if we go around the other circumstances surrounding 9/11, if you take George Bush Sr., he's been in bed with Al-Qaeda and the Bin Ladens since the 70s. His CIA funded Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in order to irritate the Russians back in the 70s and 80s. Okay? On the morning of 9/11, George Bush Sr. was having breakfast with members of the Bin Laden family somewhere in Washington, I think. Okay, he was having breakfast with relatives of the bloke they claim was carrying out the same atrocities the very same day. Now, after the atrocities, there was a blanket ban on any aircraft entering or leaving America, except for the planes that were facilitated to take all the members of the Bin Laden family out of America within a couple of days of 9/11. Now, correct me if I'm stupid, okay? But if somebody comes and bombs your country and members of their family are within that country, surely you might want to ask them a few questions before they sod off never to be seen again. Is it just me, or is that just a crazy idea? You couldn't make some of this stuff up, honestly. Right, the greatest country in the world, America, with the best air force and the best air defense system, NORAD. On the day of 9/11, 80% of NORAD airplanes were playing fucking Top Gun in the skies over Canada. Yes, 80% of NORAD's air force were on training exercises over Canada. The other 20% were implicitly told to stand down. Why would you have an air defence if you're not going to use it? Might as well sell all the aeroplanes and spend the money on oil. Right, another thing is the hijackers. Okay, within 2 days, all the hijackers had been identified with photographs and named within 2 days. These hijackers were now a pile of dust, crushed bones, dust, burnt to dust, collapsed to dust, yet they were identified within 2 days, all of them with names. Also, 16 of the hijackers were Saudi Arabians. Saudi Arabia, who's got no links to Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda, but Saudi Arabia, who've been in bed with America for decades. So why would all the hijackers be Saudi Arabian? Simple, really. Saudi Arabia was the easiest country to go to and say, look, we need 16 or 17 identities of nobodies who can go missing after the event. So Saudi Arabia complied, but the problem is not all the hijackers did go missing. Many of them were still found alive and well in the Middle East. They must have swam across the Atlantic after the attacks. Fucking hell. Right, another thing, and this happens a lot in our country. When a government's got bad news to bury, they wait and they bring it out in the middle of a crisis. Well, the day before 9/11, the government eventually, after much prompting, had to admit that they were trillions and trillions and trillions of pounds in debt. So they brought it out the day before 9/11. Well, the next day, there was no mention of trillions of pounds. In fact, for months afterwards, there was no mention of these trillions of pounds. So either it was just a stroke of luck, or it was bloody good intent timing. In other words, it was slyness of the highest order. Also, when you go to an airport anywhere in the world, there's cameras everywhere, there's footage everywhere, there's security everywhere. There's no video footage available of any of the hijackers in any of the airports on the morning of 9/11. When we had 7/7 in London, in Great Britain, we were shown camera footage of the perpetrators, of the bombers, going through train stations, going into bus stations on the morning of the attacks. We got all that, we were shown all that. Why could the Americans not be shown that after 9/11? Surely to God, on 9/11, every camera in America didn't stop working for a couple of hours. Tell me that didn't happen. What happened? Did the Millennium Bug come 9 months too late? Or 11 months too late? Crazy. Right. Also, the skill levels of these hijacking terrorist pilots would have been very minimal, most likely. But the level of skill required to direct these planes the way that they were directed into these various buildings would have needed to have been at the highest order. Again, just a small point, but to me, another smoking gun. Now, all these things I spoke about are physical evidence. Okay, the physical evidence is indisputable, really. But I find that the hardest evidence of all comes on a personal level. The best way I can describe it is evidence of a body language nature, specifically pointed at George Bush Jr. Now, on the morning of the attacks, George Bush Jr. was in a school in his brother's district of Florida, sat there singing nursery rhymes with the kids or telling stories. When his aide came into the classroom, and told him that a second plane had hit a second building and that America was under attack. Right, so George W. Bush jumped up and he sprung into action, went flying out of the school. No. George W. Bush sat there for another 10, 12, 13 minutes like the fucking dummy that he is. This is the President of the United States of America. He's just been told America is under attack. He's just been told that an unknown number of planes have been hijacked and have been aimed at high-profile targets. What's the biggest high-profile target in America? It's the President himself. As soon as he was told that, it would have been apparent to him, if he hadn't been complicit and already knew what was happening, it would have been apparent to him that he was a target. Yet he sat in that school for a further 10, 12, 13 minutes. If the hijackers were clever enough to get through customs, to hijack planes and to direct them at buildings, they were clever enough to find out where that idiot was going to be that morning. Yet he put all them children's lives at risk by continuing to sit there in that classroom reading some stupid story. Obviously, he knew what was going on. Okay? The dumb, stupid look on his face gave it all away. Listen, this is a man, the President of America, who if he's in a conference and somebody farts too loudly, within seconds he's got Secret Service agents jumping all over him to protect him. Okay? That's how highly protected this man is. How come nobody was dragging him out of that school into his bulletproof vehicle and away, whisking him away to a bunker somewhere to protect him? It's because the guy knew what was happening. He was complicit. He was actually put into office with the express intention of being in charge when this atrocity happened. And all the rhetoric he came out with after that day for the next month after month after month, all the rhetoric was so obviously, so bloody obviously rehearsed that for me, the biggest smoking gun of all of 9/11 is George W. Bush and his smirking, grinning, knowing look. Away from cameras, look at the looks and the smirks on his face, seconds and minutes before he went on camera to deliver all these solemn messages to his people. Look at the footage and tell me you're not looking in the eyes of a bastard. So to me, all the evidence is indisputable. It's indisputable that the American government and the elite behind them, the money men, the arms dealers, the people who made fortunes, your Larry Bernsteins, your arms dealers, the people who profit from war, okay, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that had nothing to do with 9/11, all them people are complicit in the murder, in the butchering, in the betraying of 3,000 plus American citizens that day for their own profit. It's time for you, American people, to wake up. Stop allowing yourself to be brainwashed. Stop looking at your TV screens and taking in the words, the propaganda and the bullshit that's been fed you by Fox News, by CNN, by your politicians. Look beyond the words, look beyond the lies, look into the background. Make it your mission to find out all the dodgy secret dealings that are going on in the shadows behind the front that's presented to you, and fight for justice. Fight for justice for the 3,000 Americans who died that day. Force the issue. Your politicians aren't going to do it. Donald Trump's not going to do it. Yeah. George Bush Sr. died yesterday. He's got off the hook. He's got away with it. He's escaped for his role in 9/11. Yeah. He's escaped for his role in the Iraq wars. He's escaped for the sexual misconduct that's been around him since the 70s. He's escaped for his part in the JFK assassination. Don't let the others escape justice. Don't let his son escape justice. Don't let Rumsfeld, don't let Rice, don't let Cheney escape justice for 9/11. Fight for the victims. Fight for the families of the victims. Don't let them off the hook, because this is what will happen. This always happens. It doesn't matter how long it takes, but the truth will always out. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Feel free to share and subscribe. See you later.